The 2000s were the golden age of turn-based JRPGs. The PS2 and PSP gave us incredible combat systems. The press turn mechanic, conditional turn-based, social links, and innovations that still influence the genre today. Today, we're counting down the top 20 best turn-based JRPGs of the 2000s. Let's get into it. We're starting strong with Shadow Heart's Covenant. And this game is absolutely insane in the best possible way. This is 1915 alternate history World War I, and you're fighting literal demons alongside a vampire wrestler named Joachim who uses frozen tuna as weapons. I'm not joking. The vibe here is dark, like genuinely unsettling cosmic horror mixed with the most absurd comedy you've ever seen in a JRPG. One minute you're dealing with Lovecraftian nightmare fuel, the next, you're watching a gay German fortune teller argue with a talking cat. It shouldn't work, but it absolutely does. The hook is the Judgement ring. Every single action in combat, attacks, spells, items, everything, requires you to time a button press as a needle spins around a ring. Hit the colored zones, your move works. Hit the tiny red zone, strike area, you get a damage boost. Miss completely, your turn is wasted. It turns every battle into this rhythm game where you're constantly on edge, and when you nail a perfect strike on a boss, it feels incredible. This is one of those cult classics where everyone who played it considers it a top-tier JRPG. The writing is sharp, the characters are memorable, and that Judgement ring system makes combat engaging in a way most turn-based games just aren't. If you can track down a copy or emulate it, absolutely do it.
Digital Devil Saga is a two-part duology from Atlus, and it's basically the bridge between mainline Shin Megami Tensei and Persona. The vibe is oppressive. You're in the junkyard, this rain-soaked purgatory where tribes fight endless wars. Then one day, everyone turns into demons and starts eating each other. The game is drenched in Hindu and Buddhist mythology, karma cycles, reincarnation, and the whole thing is just relentlessly bleak and beautiful. The hook is the mantra grid and the devour system. Instead of recruiting demons like in SMT, your party is fixed, but you customize their abilities by unlocking skills on this massive grid. And to progress on the grid, you need Atma points. How do you get Atma points? By eating enemies. You literally have to devour weakened foes to gain power, which ties directly into the game's themes of hunger and consumption. It's disturbing and brilliant. These two games tell one complete story, and it's genuinely one of the best narratives Atlus has ever written. The combat uses a simplified press turn system that's faster than Nocturne. The dungeons are atmospheric as hell, and the soundtrack by Shoji Meguro is absolutely haunting. If you're into darker JRPGs with actual thematic depth, these two duologies are essential.
Alright, let's lighten the mood a bit. Grandia 2 is one of those games that people who played it swear has the best turn-based combat system ever made. And honestly, they might be right. Now, quick heads up. Grandia 2 was originally a Dreamcast game from 2000, and that's still the definitive version. The PS2 port came out in 2002, but it's got some rough technical issues. Slowdown, graphical glitches, freezing. If you can track down the Dreamcast version or grab the HD remaster on PC and modern consoles, do that instead. But if PS2 is your only option, the core gameplay is still brilliant enough to push through the port problems. The vibe is classic high fantasy adventure. You've got the cocky swordsman, the mysterious church girl, religious corruption, all that good stuff. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel story-wise, but the characters are genuinely likable and the adventure hits all the right beats. The hook is the IP gauge system. Combat happens on a timeline where everyone, party and enemies, moves from wait to command to act. The genius part is the counter and cancel mechanics. If you hit an enemy while they're winding up an attack, you interrupt them for bonus damage. Use a critical move instead of a combo, and you knock them backward on the timeline, potentially canceling their turn entirely. It creates this rhythmic flow where positioning and timing matter more than raw stats. The combat in Grandia 2 is genuinely some of the most satisfying turn-based gameplay you'll ever experience. Every battle feels tactical and dynamic, and the boss fights are perfectly tuned to push this system to its limits. There's an HD remaster available on PC and modern consoles with all the technical problems fixed, so there's no excuse not to check this one out. Dragon Quarter is the black sheep of the Breath of Fire series, and it's one of the most divisive JRPGs of the entire decade. But if you're into experimental game design, this thing is fascinating. The vibe is dystopian survival horror. You're trapped in an underground facility, civilization is dying, and the air itself is toxic. This is the complete opposite of the open-world fantasy the series was known for. It's claustrophobic, oppressive, and relentlessly tense. The hook is the D counter. The protagonist, Ryu, can transform into a dragon for massive power, but every action raises this counter percentage. If it hits 100%, you die and the game ends. Not game over, the game ends. You have to restart from the beginning. But here's the twist. There's a SOL system, where restarting carries over items and unlocks new story scenes. The game is designed around multiple playthroughs, almost like a roguelike before that was a thing. This is one of those games that was way ahead of its time. The resource management is brutal, the dungeon design is methodical and tense, and the whole D-counter mechanic forces you to make constant risk-reward decisions. It's not for everyone. If you want a traditional JRPG, this ain't it. But if you want something that takes risks and does things no other JRPG was doing in 2002, Dragon Quarter is genuinely unique. Game 5, Valkyrie Profile 2. Valkyrie Profile 2 is one of the most technically impressive JRPGs on the PS2, and it combines that with a genuinely innovative combat system that deserves way more recognition. The vibe is Norse mythology meets political intrigue. You're a Valkyrie trapped in a human princess's body, dealing with divine politics and mortal wars. The story gets dense and complicated, but the world building is phenomenal and the presentation is gorgeous. This game pushed the PS2. The hook is the photon system and the body part targeting. Exploration is side-scrolling, where you freeze enemies with photons to platform around them. Combat shifts to a 3D field where movement costs action points, but you can dash to close distance for free if you time it right. The real depth comes from targeting specific body parts. You can sever tails, break armor, destroy wings, and each part drops different crafting materials. So you're not just fighting enemies, you're strategically dismantling them. The combat has this puzzle-like quality where you're constantly thinking about positioning, resource management, and what materials you need. Boss fights become these tactical challenges where you're trying to break specific parts while managing your AP and keeping your party alive. It's complex, it's rewarding, and once it clicks, it's absolutely brilliant. Okay, this one's for the weirdos. Artanelico is a game about singing magical girls, diving into people's subconscious minds, and some extremely questionable visual novel segments. It's niche as hell, but if this is your vibe, there's nothing else quite like it. The vibe is fantasy sci-fi with heavy anime aesthetics. You're in a tower world where artificial beings called Ravatails cast magic through song, and the whole thing has this weird blend of technological ruins and magical singing. The hook is the song magic system and the cosmosphere. In combat, you're protecting a Ravatail in the back row while she charges up increasingly powerful song magic. The frontline fighters have to keep enemies away while she builds up to these massive screen-clearing spells. Outside of combat, you dive into the Ravatail's subconscious, the cosmosphere, and you play through visual novel scenarios to resolve her trauma and unlock new songs. It's part dungeon crawler, part dating sim, part psychological therapy session. This game is deeply weird and very fan service heavy, so it's not for everyone. But the core concept of protecting a singing spellcaster while managing aggro and timing is actually really engaging, and the Cosmosphere stuff, while bizarre, has genuine emotional moments. If you're into niche JRPGs with unique hooks, Artanelico is worth experiencing just for how strange and specific it is. Wild Arms 3 is the cel-shaded Western JRPG you didn't know you needed. This series always had this Wild West aesthetic, but the third game really commits to it with gorgeous anime Western art direction. The vibe is drifters in a dying wasteland. You've got 4 protagonists wandering the desert planet of Phile Gaia, each with their own motivations, and the whole thing has this melancholic frontier atmosphere. It's not grimdark, but there's a real sense of a world slowly fading away. The hook is the force system and the arm weapons. Every character wields guns as their primary weapons, arms, which are these magical firearms, and combat revolves around building up force points to unleash special abilities. Each character plays completely differently, and there's a lot of depth in how you manage resources and build your party's synergy. What makes Wild Arms 3 special is how committed it is to the Western aesthetic. The music is phenomenal, lots of whistling and guitars. The towns have this frontier feel, and the puzzles and dungeons often involve using tools in creative ways. It's available on PS4 and PS5 through backwards compatibility, and it still holds up really well. If you want something different from the usual fantasy or sci-fi JRPG settings, this is it.
Suikoden 3 is a political war drama with 108 recruitable characters, and it tells its story in this really clever way that more JRPGs should have copied. The vibe is epic-scale political conflict. You've got 3 factions, the Zexan Federation, the Grasslands tribes, and a mercenary company, all caught in a brewing war. The game doesn't present one side as good or evil. Everyone has legitimate grievances and motivations. The hook is the Trinity Sight system. For the first 3 chapters, you play from 3 different perspectives, Hugo, Chris, and Ghetto, experiencing the same events from different angles. It's basically Rashomon in JRPG form. You see the same battles, the same political maneuvering, but from completely different viewpoints, and it creates this really nuanced understanding of the conflict. The Suikoden series is famous for its castle building and character recruitment, and 3 has all of that. You're constantly meeting new characters, recruiting them to your cause, and watching your headquarters grow. The buddy system in combat pairs your 6 party members into 3 units, which adds a layer of strategy to team composition. This is one of those games where the world feels genuinely alive and reactive to your choices.
Suikoden 5 is the series returning to form after the divisive 4th game, and for a lot of fans, this is peak Suikoden alongside the legendary Suikoden 2. The vibe is Game of Thrones before Game of Thrones was huge. You're a prince in the matriarchal queendom of Falena, and political intrigue, succession crises, and civil war dominate the story. The writing is genuinely sharp, with complex characters and moral ambiguity throughout. The hook is classic Suikoden perfected. You've got the 6-character party back, the 108 stars of destiny recruitment, the base building, the war battles. Everything that made Suikoden 2 beloved is here, refined and expanded. The combat is strategic with the formation system, and the political narrative has real weight and consequences. What makes Suikoden 5 special is how thoughtfully it handles its themes. Characters betray you for understandable reasons, allies have conflicting interests, and the game trusts you to handle a complex political narrative without dumbing it down. The pacing is slow. It takes several hours before the plot really kicks off, but once it does, it's one of the most engrossing JRPG stories of the era. If you're into character-driven political dramas, this is essential.
Xenosaga is space opera JRPG insanity. This was supposed to be a 6-part series, and while only 3 episodes got made, the ambition here is staggering. The vibe is hard sci-fi with Gnostic mysticism. You're dealing with ancient alien artifacts, consciousness transfer, android philosophy, and deep lore conspiracy plots. The cutscenes are long, some exceed 30 minutes, so if you want gameplay-focused experiences, this might frustrate you. But if you want dense world-building and philosophical storytelling, Episode 1 sets up something genuinely fascinating. The hook is the boost system. Combat has this turn order timeline, but characters can spend their boost gauge to interrupt and act immediately, which creates these clutch moments where you can save a dying ally or cancel an enemy's big attack.
Boss fights become puzzles where you're managing boosts, chaining attacks, and timing your interruptions perfectly. Xenosaga is the foundation for what eventually became Xenoblade. Tetsuya Takahashi's vision for massive, philosophical sci-fi JRPGs starts here. And while the pacing is rough and the gameplay isn't as refined as later Monolith Soft games, there's nothing else quite like it. If you're into lore-heavy, ambitious storytelling and don't mind sitting through cinema-length cutscenes, Episode 1 is a wild ride. Episode 3 is where Xenosaga Trilogy sticks the landing. After the mixed reception to Episode 2, this game refined the combat, tightened the pacing, and brought all those complex narrative threads to an emotional conclusion. The vibe is apocalyptic and deeply personal. The stakes are literally universal. We're talking about the fate of consciousness itself, but it's grounded in the relationships between Shion, Cosmos, and the rest of the cast. The final hours are genuinely heartbreaking. The hook is the refined combat system. Episode 3 has faster, more engaging battles than the first two games, with the break system creating vulnerabilities you can exploit for massive damage. The boost system returns but feels more balanced, and boss fights are legitimately challenging tactical puzzles. What makes Episode 3 special is how it pays off everything from the first two games. If you've been following Shion's character arc, Cosmos' evolution, and the mysteries of the Zohar, the ending is incredibly satisfying. The problem is it's stuck on PS2 with no ports or remasters, so experiencing the full trilogy requires commitment. But if you do commit, Episode 3 is a hell of a conclusion. Game 12, Mana Khemia, Alchemists of Al-Ravis. Mana Khemia is what happens when you take the Atelier series crafting addiction and wrap it in a turn-based JRPG set at an alchemy school. It's cozy, it's charming, and the combat system is way better than it has any right to be. The vibe is Magical Academy slice of life. You're a student at an alchemy school, attending classes, making friends, and crafting items. It's lighthearted and character-driven with a lot of anime comedy and surprisingly heartfelt character arcs. The hook is the grow book and the support system. Instead of traditional leveling, you unlock stat boosts by crafting specific items and slotting them into a skill grid. Combat features lightning-fast character swapping. Reserve party members can jump in mid-turn to attack, defend, or take a hit for someone. This creates a rhythm where you're constantly rotating characters, chaining attacks, and managing your whole party dynamically. The crafting loop in Mana Khemia is genuinely addictive. You're constantly gathering materials, synthesizing new items, and unlocking abilities through the grow book. The turn-based combat is fast and satisfying, and the character interactions have real charm. If you want a JRPG that's more about the journey and the characters than saving the world, Mana Khemia nails that vibe. Disgaea is the game that asks, what if we removed the level cap and let you grind to level 9,999, and then builds an entire tactical RPG around that absurd premise? The vibe is demon comedy with surprising heart. You're Lahal, a demon prince trying to reclaim his throne in the Netherworld, and the writing is genuinely funny. It's self-aware, it parodies JRPG and anime tropes constantly, and the characters are way more endearing than they should be. The hook is infinite progression and the GeoPanel system. Levels cap at 9,999, damage numbers reach the millions, and you can enter the item world, procedurally generated dungeons inside every item in the game to level up your weapons and armor. The GeoPanels turn battlefields into puzzles where colored tiles grant effects like invincibility or bonus XP, and you destroy geosymbols to trigger chain reactions. Disgaea is for people who love breaking games. The post-game content is more extensive than the main story, and optimizing your characters becomes this deep rabbit hole of mechanics and synergies. If you're a min-maxer who wants a tactics game you can sink hundreds of hours into, Disgaea is basically designed specifically for you.
Phantom Brave is another Nippon Ichi game, but this one does something completely different with the tactics formula, by getting rid of the grid entirely. The vibe is melancholy and surprisingly touching. You play as Morona, a young girl who can see phantoms in a world where most people fear her abilities. The story deals with loneliness, found family, and acceptance, and it's way more emotional than you'd expect. The hook is the gridless combat and the confined system. There's no grid. Characters move freely within a circular radius. To summon allies, Morona has to confine phantom souls to objects on the map. Bind a phantom to a rock, high defense, low speed. Bind it to a flower, high intelligence, magical power. The object you choose determines your unit's stats, so every battle becomes this resource management puzzle. The confined system creates really interesting tactical decisions. You're constantly evaluating the battlefield. Do I need a tanky unit, so I'll use that boulder? Or do I need magic damage, so I'll use that bush? It's weird, it's creative, and once you understand the systems, it's incredibly satisfying. The story is genuinely heartfelt too, which is a nice bonus.
Romancing Saga, Minstrel Song is the Saga series doing what it does best, making a completely non-linear JRPG where you can tackle content in almost any order and breaking every traditional RPG convention. The vibe is open-ended adventure. There's no fixed protagonist. You choose from 8 different characters, each with their own starting scenario and goals. The world scales based on how many battles you fought, not your level, so you can sequence break and tackle high difficulty content early if you're skilled enough. The hook is the glimmer system and the free scenario structure. Characters learn abilities spontaneously in battle. A light bulb literally appears above their head when they glimmer a new technique. It's random but influenced by the weapon you're using, so there's strategy in how you build your party. The free scenario system means quests can be completed in wildly different orders and the world reacts to your progress. Romancing Saga is for players who want freedom and experimentation. The lack of hand-holding and traditional structure can be jarring if you're used to linear JRPGs. But if you want a game that trusts you to explore and figure things out, Minstrel Song is brilliant. The PS2 version is a gorgeous remake of the original, and it's one of the most unique JRPGs of the era.
Jeanne d'Arc. Jeanne d'Arc is Level 5's take on the Joan of Arc story with fantasy elements, and it's one of the PSP's best tactical RPGs that almost nobody played. The vibe is historical fantasy. You're retelling Joan of Arc's story, but with demons, magical armlets, and tactical battles. The presentation is gorgeous. Level 5's art direction is always top tier, and the story balances historical beats with fantasy escalation really well. The hook is the burning aura system. When you attack an enemy, you create an aura zone behind them. Move another ally into that zone and they get a massive attack boost. This encourages aggressive, forward-moving tactics instead of defensive camping. You're constantly trying to chain attacks, position units into auras, and create these combo chains. The burning aura system makes every battle feel dynamic. You're rewarded for taking risks and pushing forward, and watching your units link attacks together is satisfying. The story is engaging, the art is beautiful, and the tactical gameplay is rock solid. If you have a PSP or Vita, Jeanne d'Arc is absolutely worth tracking down.
Nocturne is the game that asks, what if we destroyed the world in the tutorial and made you decide what kind of reality comes next? And then backs that up with some of the hardest, most rewarding turn-based combat ever designed. The vibe is apocalyptic philosophy. The world ends during the conception, and you're left wandering a vortex world filled with demons, deciding which ideology will shape the new reality. It's dark, it's oppressive, and the atmosphere is unmatched. The hook is the press turn system. Each party member gives you a turn icon. Hit a weakness or crit, you only consume half an icon, effectively giving you extra actions. Miss or hit a null, you lose 2 icons or your entire turn. This system punishes button mashing and rewards preparation and knowledge of demon affinities. Nocturne is legitimately difficult. The Matador boss fight is infamous for destroying unprepared players, and the game demands you understand the press turn system inside and out. But when you're exploiting weaknesses, chaining attacks, and perfectly managing your turn economy, it feels incredible. The HD remaster is available on modern platforms, and if you want a challenging, atmospheric JRPG that treats you like an adult, Nocturne is essential.
Persona 3 is the game that saved Atlas and redefined what a JRPG could be, blending dungeon crawling with social simulation and wrapping it all in a meditation on mortality. The vibe is urban supernatural with a dark edge. You're a high school student fighting shadows during the dark hour, and you summon personas by shooting yourself in the head with an evoker. The whole game is themed around death and acceptance, memento mori, and it tackles grief, loss, and what it means to live in the face of inevitable death. The hook is the social link system. The strength of your summoned personas is directly tied to the relationships you build during the day. Spend time with friends, join clubs, help people with their problems, and your combat abilities grow stronger. It creates this genius loop where narrative investment pays mechanical dividends. Thez is the definitive version, with the additional The Answer epilogue. The combat is a simplified press turn system, the one more mechanic. And while the AI-controlled party members can be frustrating, the dungeon crawling is solid. But what makes Persona 3 special is how everything ties together thematically. The social links, the combat, the calendar system, the music. It all reinforces the central themes of mortality and living life to the fullest. It's a masterpiece, and it deserves every bit of praise it gets.
Final Fantasy X is the turn-based JRPG that defined the PS2 era. This is the game that brought the genre to mainstream Western audiences, and it sold over 20 million copies doing it. The vibe is epic pilgrimage meets tragic love story. You're Titus, a star athlete thrown into the medieval fantasy world of Spira on a religious journey to defeat an ancient evil called sin. The voice acting was the first for the series, sometimes awkward, sometimes genuinely moving, but it fundamentally changed how JRPGs told stories. The hook is the CTB system, conditional turn-based combat. There's a timeline on the right showing exactly when everyone acts next. Use a quick hit, your next turn comes faster. Summon an Aeon, it delays you. This removed all time pressure and turned battles into pure strategy where you could plan multiple moves ahead. The sphere grid is the other innovation. Instead of traditional leveling, you move across a giant board of stat nodes. The healer Yuna can become a tank. Titus can learn black magic. It breaks every class restriction and lets you customize however you want. Final Fantasy X has a Metacritic score of 92 and remains the peak of turn-based design in the series. The HD remaster is available on everything: PS3, PS4, Vita, Switch, Xbox, and PC. So if you're into turn-based JRPGs, this is essential. We're ending on Dragon Quest V, Hand of the Heavenly Bride. And this isn't a hidden gem in the sales sense, but it's criminally overlooked in the West. The PS2 remake is the definitive version of one of the greatest JRPG stories ever told. The vibe is generational epic. The game spans roughly 30 years of your protagonist's life. You start as a child, grow into an adult, choose a wife, get married, and eventually adventure alongside your own children. No other JRPG does this, and the emotional investment it creates is profound. The hook is monster recruitment and the generational storytelling. DQ5 is the original monster collecting RPG. It predates Pokemon, and the PS2 remake perfected the system. You're constantly recruiting monsters mid-battle, building your party from a mix of humans and creatures. But the real hook is how the story unfolds across decades. The choices you make, especially who you marry, have genuine emotional weight. Dragon Quest V has one of the most heartbreaking and triumphant narratives in JRPG history. The sense of time passing, watching your character grow, experiencing loss and joy across a lifetime, it's incredible. The combat is traditional turn-based Dragon Quest, which means it's rock solid and refined. This is the game that proves turn-based JRPGs can tell stories no other genre can match.
So there you have it, 20 turn-based JRPGs from the 2000s that deserve way more love than they got. Some are cult classics with dedicated fan bases, some are genuinely obscure, but all of them offer something special. The PS2 era was wild. Studios were experimenting, taking risks, and creating games that would never get greenlit today. Some of these are stuck on their original hardware, some have remasters, but all of them are worth seeking out if you love turn-based combat and creative game design. Let me know which ones you've played, which ones I missed, and what your favorite underrated JRPG from this era is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.